All right. Welcome to episode one of the MoCo Mike Live podcast, the podcast discussing Montgomery County, Maryland, and beyond issues where you are part of the show. Come join us live and offer questions and comments on Facebook, YouTube, X/Twitter, and Instagram, and your comments may be featured in the show. I'm your host, Jason Maxstein of Moderately MoCo, and today we have co-host Esther Wells of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League with us to dissect and discuss what to look for in the massive MCPS operating budget that will be released tomorrow. And I think we are live across all the different platforms, so we can go ahead and hand it off to Esther to start out here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And as you come on in, thank you for listening in and engaging with me as I take a deep dive and just helping everyone get their bearings and oriented with the MCPS operating budget. And so, as Jason mentioned, thank you so much to Moderately MoCo for hosting me this evening. We're only going to be here for a few minutes with you this evening, but if you have questions, definitely drop it in the chat. Let us know if you find this information helpful and stay in touch with us. We will have more information as the budget gets released again tomorrow. The FY 2026 operating budget for MCPS will be released tomorrow by the superintendent. And so what you're seeing on my screen here is just some notes of things that I look for as the president of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League, and also as a CPA and being very familiar professionally with budgets, to say where are tax dollars going, right? Currently, the FY 2025 operating budget, it's $3.3 billion. And so my initial estimate is that the number is going to be even higher moving forward for the FY 2026, unless enrollment decreases at a material level. And so when the superintendent issues his operating budget, so we're going to look at FY 2025, which is the current budget, and this will just help you get oriented so when the new one comes out, we're able to do some parity. So I've opened up the proposed budget, which again is what will be released tomorrow by the superintendent. And so it looks something similar like this. It's going to be 2026. The first 10 pages of the operating budget is where the meat of everything that you need to know occurs. So on the first 10 pages, as you see here, the superintendent's letter to the Board of Education. As you know, we currently have 7 adult board members and 1 student member of the board, and their sole employee is the superintendent. And so this letter is issued to the board for the superintendent, what he believes is needed for MCPS and for the board to ultimately vote to tentatively approve in February. And so as I mentioned, the first 10 pages, you will see a lot of information that you need to know. So starting on page 4, with the state revenue. So here you will see when it comes to state revenue, the MCPS methodology that they use is usually same as last year. So I have briefly reached out to the CFO at MCPS to just kind of understand, well, year over year for the state revenue from the governor, why is it only changing by about $10 million? And primarily the methodology that MCPS utilizes is same as last year, and then plus any known increases in the funding. So here you would see $10,000 for known grants increase funding, right? And the governor, he issues his budget in January each year, which again is after the superintendent's proposed budget. So that delay does create some unpredictable, unmet needs within our budget that the local taxpayers are tentatively going to need to fund or ultimately need to fund, which is what happened in 2025. So in the current budget, when the superintendent issued her initial proposed budget, we see here it was 943. Then the governor told MCPS, well, here's how much the actual funding is going to be. And it was $30 million higher than what we budgeted. But instead of reducing the local taxpayers' portion of the budget to make us whole, MCPS, for various business purposes, they decided to do other things with the funds and left local taxpayers paying a lot more of the budget than just kind of reallocating between local and state. So we want to look out for that if MCPS is being very conservative with the state revenue, that local taxpayers are the ones that ultimately will have to bear the brunt of that. And we don't want that to happen again. year over year. And so one of the things that I'm proposing for our FY 2026 methodology moving forward, or even future periods, is for the CFO, which was recently made permanent, Ms. Yvonne Alfonso Windsor, to reach out to the governor's budget team analysts to request preliminary estimates and detail how the state funding formula looks for the current year tentatively, right? Like they know, just as we know with our
Hang on one sec. Sorry, I accidentally cut Esther off there. Just trying to figure out these. Okay, you're back. Sorry.
Okay, yes. So sorry if I cut out, but so as I was mentioning with the budget, the methodology for determining the initial proposed state level funding for MCPS, I do recommend that their budget team reach out to the state budget team to get preliminary estimates of what that number will be, so that we're not using a placeholder that historically has been materially off from where the final number is. We have huge big ticket items like the Maryland Blueprint for Education that's being phased in over the next decade that would need to be accounted for. And the earlier we have that information, the better we're able to produce a proposed budget to bring to the community and to bring to the board members that we can, digest and make recommendations for how those funds would be spent. So then moving along here on page 5, when we talk about the revenue and expenditures detail, so on the federal, state, and local level, so just to get you oriented here, MCPS is funded by various funding sources, right? So local revenue means Montgomery County taxpayer dollars that the county council is going to approve and allocate appropriate to MCPS. The state revenue, it's still our tax dollars, but it's tax dollars that has been sent to the state, and then they push down back again to our school system, where MCPS is truly a state run program, but the county council has funding authority over our schools, but that's as far as it goes. And then we have the MCPS fund balance. I put a pin in that for right now. I'll get back to it, but you can see last year it was 0, which is basically unprecedented. And we'll talk about the implications of that. And then we have federal grants, which is around 3% of our budget, and we'll talk about that as well in light of the recent federal elections. And
Excuse me, real quick, Esther. Did you want me to be sharing your screen now, or saving that for later? Okay.
Yeah, is my screen sharing?
All right. It was not, but okay. There we go.
Okay, awesome. Sorry. So thanks for following along with me. And so again, this is the proposed budget from last year that I am leveraging for our conversation, and then anticipating for 2026, we'll be able to mirror a lot of this information for us to digest tomorrow, which the superintendent has said he will release the FY 2026 budget. So again, we have these various funding sources of MCPS to get us to, again, this was the proposed budget of the $3.3 billion. The federal funds represent about 3% of our budget. However, we will touch on which population of students within MCPS receives those funds. And then we have a few enterprise grants and smaller allocations. So that is one thing to look at, changes in our recent election and what implications that may have. I do propose, and I believe our superintendent is interested in taking a zero-based budget approach. He has mentioned it at the recent board meeting and earlier this December and in front of the county council in November. And so we'll see over time what that looks like. But I believe that is a better presentation of taking a look at your base budget on how you build up your budget from bottom up, versus historically MCPS has taken an incremental view at the budget to say, okay, our baseline is the prior year funding, and then we're just going to keep layering on, bolt on, move on type of thing. And that's no longer going to work, because it never takes a holistic view as to, well, have historical programs been doing what it should, or do we need to reassess those things and allocate it elsewhere? And so that's one of my recommendations for MCPS for the upcoming fiscal years, not necessarily for tomorrow, but things that they should be considering. Then when it comes to the maintenance of effort, this number seems to just it's not as readily available as I think it should. So historically, the maintenance of effort is, like it says, the minimal amount of funding that we MCPS or the county council should fund our student population. and it's based on a formula. And essentially, then each year we can never go below the maintenance of effort. However, historically, MCPS has always been funded in excess of maintenance of effort. And so taxpayers and the community have been very generous when it comes to funding our local school system. And so I do think it's appropriate that we then hold MCPS accountable for those funds, especially the ones above maintenance of effort, and to see a return on investment. One of the new terms that the superintendent has coined this year is academic return on investment, I believe it's called. And so I'm very interested to see, if we are funding MCPS above the minimum, then we should see above minimum proficiency levels in reading and above level results and outcomes for our students in math. So we'll definitely keep a look on that. Then the next item on page 6 and 27, it talks about the bargaining agreement. So, MCPS employees, they belong to one of 4 associations. So you have the MCEA, which is for the teachers. You have your SEIU, the service employees, like your custodial services, your food services, your school bus drivers. And those 2 unions are the ones that historically have endorsed candidates. So you have like MCEA, which does the Apple ballot, or you have the SEIU that does the school bus ballot. And then you have MCAP and MCBOA, which isn't as active when it comes to endorsing candidates, but they are for like the principals and ensuring that their voice is heard. And so last year, or the current year we're in, FY 2025, is the last year of the current bargaining agreement. And so we should anticipate a new agreement coming out of MCPS and the unions for the next either 1 to 2 years. The current one was to 2 years. So I don't know if that's standard or if it could be longer or shorter. But regardless, we will see a new agreement within our operating budget this year so that we can plan on, well, here are the minimum costs of increase for the next number of years based on the terms and contracts. One interesting thing that I read today that came out from Governor Moore is that he has recently stated that there is going to be like a pause or a slowdown in implementation of the blueprint, which specifically teacher salaries was a big part of that, in increasing teacher salaries at a minimum salary of a new teacher is at $60,000. And with MCPS being in a high cost of living area, that's not the floor for MCPS. If, the small town in the middle, on the western side, for example, where cost of living is lower, they have to be at 60,000. That MCPS has to be above 60,000. And so on one hand, it's nice to have that pressure kind of be relieved from our budget within MCPS, but then also keeping in mind that we want our teachers to be able to live in the communities that they're serving in, because it's their work and their labor that is truly keeping up the appreciation and the value of our homes, which is our largest investment. And so definitely, Jason, let me know if there's any comments or questions or concerns. I can pause.
So far, I'm not seeing any comments, so we'll just keep on going. There's a lot of people watching, but no comments yet. So again, feel free to comment on any platform that you're watching this, and we will see it. It may pop up your comment on the screen. I'm watching for all the Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X/Twitter. It's live streaming to all those locations. And if you're on a different platform, come join us on one of those and give a comment. So
awesome. Well, thank you. So then I will keep it rolling in interest of time. And so then going to the next item. So on PDF page 7, I've highlighted here we're within the first 10 pages, which most of the information is located from the superintendent. Historically, we've had ESSER funds, which was the elementary and secondary emergency relief funds that we got from the federal government, which has ended. The pandemic funds have ended, and FY 2025 was the last year that we will see ESSER funds. And so what MCPS did last year was they moved some of the programs or expenditures that were funded with one-time funds from ESSER to our base operating budget, which means they've moved those expenditures onto taxpayers. And so one of the, I guess maybe from a look back perspective, one of the things that I don't agree with that was done is you don't use one-time funds to create programs that are not one-time. right? You don't create new positions with one-time funds. And I think one of those casualties was the MCPS medical office, where I think it was Dr. Kapunin and her office that was funded out of the need for having an office like that to help us navigate the COVID pandemic. When the funds ended, like we saw this year, that whole department was eliminated. And I think there were a few other eliminations that happened, but I just don't think it's good practice to use one-time funds on ongoing expenditures, because that is essentially a ticket for taxpayers to fund on a go-forward basis. And so last year we had something like this happen. This year would be interesting to see if there's any other any other programs that are currently funded either by grants or one-time funds that are moving on to the base budget, because local taxpayers cannot absorb these type of transitions year after year. And then we have on page 8, so we just talked a little bit about the blueprint for Maryland's education, future education. And so if you're not familiar with the blueprint, it is the governor's basically initiative to increase the amount of pre-K programs and full day slots that we have within our school system to ensure that our most vulnerable learners, our littlest learners, have access to early education and set them up to prevent any type of achievement gap. It's also a way to increase the salaries for teachers, as we talked about. However, there was never a sustainable funding source that was identified for paying for this multi-billion-dollar program over the next 10 years. And that is something that has been known. I've even known that 2 years ago when I really started paying close attention to MCPS. And so I think things are coming to a head this year, where the governor is finally willing to admit that we can no longer afford Maryland blueprint for Maryland's future at the current pace of implementation, that we need to take a pause, we need to slow down. And so it would be interesting to see the commentary here from the superintendent on the implications that may have, and whether that's going to impact the bargaining agreements that are tentatively been agreed upon. As we know with the bargaining agreement, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the chat, is that the agreements are not final until Montgomery County Council approves the budget. If the county council reduces any portion of the BOE's tentatively approved budget, that delta of reduced funding could potentially impact the bargaining agreement, is my understanding. And I think that's what caused last year, all of the sit-ins and the protests with the unions, for them to get full funding, because they knew that they had skin in the game, that their agreements may not, remain as is. But the county council members were clear that MCPS should keep those contracts the same, intact, regardless of the reduced funding. So we'll see if there's anything that comes of the Maryland Blueprint for Education and the impact there, because it will relieve the pressure and the allocation for those funding. So then moving along here to federal. So we just talked about that a little bit, but let's go into it some more. On page 8, we talk about the accelerators. So accelerators, in layman's terms, is really more like a like-to-do item, as superintendent now calls it, where it's projects or initiatives that would help, remediate some things that are not currently funded at the levels that they'd like. So for FY 2025, the proposed accelerator was only one. In prior years, it was a larger scale, but last year was mainly around the music instruments, to repair and replace those instruments. Some of those funds, I believe, stayed in, but a lot of it also got cut with the reduced funding. For FY 2026, I would prioritize including additional funding for out-of-school time initiatives and programs, and continued funding for high-dosage tutoring in reading and math. So like the math coaches and the content specialists. I really feel like with the superintendent, one of the things he has said is like, you're focusing on the fundamentals. And I'm not a sports, enthusiast, but really when it gets to, do focus on the fundamentals, focus on the basics. MCPS needs to just get back to basics, get back to what a school system is supposed to do, focus on academic achievement, focus on outcomes for students, and that is core to reading and math. The saying is that students learn to read from K to 3, so they can read to learn from 4th to 12th grade, right? And MCPS has not been as successful as they have historically in doing the basics. And so I think it's time to return to that before they can build on any of these extra things that they've been trying to do lately. Turning to page 9, the efficiency reduction. So one of the things last year that MCPS did that I thought was great is they were proactive in trying to find ways to reduce costs prior to initiating the proposed budget. I think this year they should continue to do that. The superintendent has stated to the council and to the board that he's flattening the org chart for central office, which I think a lot of testimonies have come in from community members that we believe our central office is too big. And so we have seen lately that MCPS has posted for the 8 executive positions, which are, those positions that pay $249,000 a year, almost $250,000. And so taxpayers are putting their money where their mouth is. And so if we should get what we pay for. And so one of the things that I am looking out for when it comes to efficiencies and flattening the org chart is to see what the org chart would look like as being proposed by the superintendent tomorrow, and reducing the amount of bureaucracy, reducing all of the levels within the org chart of, you have a chief, and then you have an associate superintendent, and then you will have an assistant associate. It's too much. So I'd like to see some of those layers flattened like the superintendent has said, and to find some cost savings there, while also, again, showing up his team, because a lot of those people that are there, he inherited, right? They were there under prior administration. And so for the superintendent to be successful, I think it is good that he's able to have the best of the best. He's able to have the most competitive folks in those roles with the highest level of skills that he's able to pay a competitive salary for, to increase the likelihood that his initiatives will really be executed with fidelity and lead to success. So I'm interested to see what happens there, and how the superintendent allocates those funds. And then turning to page 17, so we're going to talk about table 1. So on page 17, table 1, this is an overall summary of the school, of the budget from a state perspective. So again, the state is the one that governs MCPS, and they have required certain categories must be listed within the budget. And one of the things I do with the table 1, so again, we talked about 3.3 is the total budget to help you get oriented here. The first half of the table is based on FTEs, not dollars. And then the second half is the comparable in dollars. Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry. This is the dollars here. So here you have the positions in FTE, and then you have the same positions in dollars. And so it kind of just alternates that way to say, if positions are increasing by, usually for me, I look at 10% scoping, increasing or decreasing by 10%, some material number, I'm trying to understand why. So this is more the high level summary for me to focus on getting to the deeper dive pages of, well, what is included in these numbers and how is it being arrived and does it make sense? And so when I was going over the budget around this time last year, I highlighted, here are some of the rows that initially I'm like, I don't understand why this is happening. I need to know more information. One of the criticisms of MCPS is they have a lot of other. So you could see here under contractual services, there's other contractual services for $92 million. That's not appropriate. An other category can be a miscellaneous hodgepodge of a few items that are, immaterial or small. That's not a small number. That's a really big number. We need the detail. And one of the things the superintendent has said with this year, they are offering a Power BI tool, a dashboard for the budget. There's a demo available online for FY 2025 for users of the budget to do a deep dive into this number that I can drill down on 92 million and get down to the penny of what exactly that means. And so I will be looking to see if there's meaningful descriptions of what that means. I know one of our council members last year, when he was president, he was told by the then COO, Mr. Hull, Brian Hull, that contractual services can include anything from snow removal to special education resources. That's not okay, because that's a wide range where snow removal, that's needed because of the weather. Okay, that's fine. But special education, that shouldn't be embedded in this other number, because if I would like to know comprehensively how much special education we're spending on those students, I can't get that detail from other. And so I am looking to see that we have better category descriptions for items and where our tax dollars are going, and that they're meaningful for us to really understand what's going on. So that's one of the things I'll be looking for. Leased equipment. This, I believe, is our electric school bus. that MCPS leases 100% of their electric school buses from, as we've seen, Highland Electric, which there's been a debacle, and they are recently working to renegotiate the contract, and there's been a whole thing about that. But that's where we see a lot of the investment we're making with our leased equipment. So I believe there's a difference between the MCPS fleet for like their regular vans that they operate. I believe those are purchased, but when it comes to electric school buses, those are all leased, the equipment for the bus and the charging station. So that'll be interesting to see how much that comes up to in the budget to be released tomorrow. So that was table one. And so we move on to any questions so far. I'll keep going.
Yep.
So table two, we have the budget revenue here. What we want to focus on, like we talked about, the fund balance. So the fund balance, the way I think of it historically with MCPS, is like they have their own funding source, their own bank account. So MCPS is not a funding body. They receive their funds from the county council, which is the central treasury. And so historically, with just the way the funds have worked out every fiscal year, MCPS has accumulated some level of fund balance. Historically, it's been around 35, 25 million. But as of last year, due to a county council policy, they said, no, you should not have your own funding balance. Anytime you need funds, you should come to us, the county council, and we will appropriate the funds for you. You should not be an independent treasury. That was the first thing that happened. We'll see moving forward if MCPS continue to have a zero, or if it's above. It has to be at least zero or above. It can never be negative. So we'll continue to look at that to see the implications of MCPS no longer having a fund balance. Page 22, talking about the table. Table 3. So table 3 here, what you're going to see is student enrollment. So I think this is probably one of the top items that I want to focus on. Historically, as you've seen, MCPS enrollment has been decreasing post-pandemic. So you could see here, total, it was 162,000. And these are the budgeted proposed numbers, 162. And then it dropped to 161 in terms of projected enrollment. However, I do want to note that though the total pre-K through 12 enrollment has decreased, special education has increased. And the dollar implication of that is the students that require above average funding by taxpayers are special education students, EML students, and farm students. They have differentiated resources, whether it's Title I school or it's the private schools, the paraeducators. So the fact that overall our enrollment is going down, however, the student population that is growing are the students that cost us more money. That will net out where you may not see the dollars translate into reduced budget because you have the most expensive students increasing in your school system and the less lower need students decreasing in your school system. One of the things, though, that I think is important to note when it comes to enrollment is when the superintendent, he met with the county council, I believe it was on November 12th, one of the jarring PowerPoint slides that I wanted to bring to your attention is that MCPS's budget to actual enrollment since 2020 has been wide, right? So MCPS, so total actual enrollment is in blue and total budget enrollment is in orange. So MCPS has overestimated, overprojected the enrollment in MCPS consistently over these years, which ultimately means that we have funded the school system at a level that didn't materialize. And my concern or recommendation is that we need to change the way we do our projection for enrollment because we're wrong. We're materially wrong each year. And so why would we continue to use the same formula pre-pandemic that may have been more accurate? Something changed where we should no longer do our enrollment this way because it's wrong. Our projections are never materializing. We need to understand why, and we need to change the way we're doing our projections. And then when we look at, like we talked about briefly here, the student service groups enrollment, again, English language development students, you can see that's increasing. IEP students, again, that's special education, that's increasing. And our farms, free and reduced meal students, that's increasing. These are our most vulnerable population of students that's increasing, and their needs are greater than the average student. And so we will continue to see that increase in the needs from our budget. So we want to keep that in mind moving forward. We need to improve on our accuracy when it comes to projected enrollment of our student population. So then the next item that we want.
Hey, Esther, we've got a comment from Brenda Diaz. She said, how many ELL slash special ed slash farm students have we added overall? I'm not sure if that's separately accounted for.
Yeah, so we have those populations. Sorry, so that's what we have here. Right. So for the English language development students, FY15, it was 23,000. In FY 2020, it became almost 30,000. So we added, what is that, like 6,000, 6,500. And then for FY 25, currently we're at 32. So in total, we've added almost 10,000 students for the ELD, and then so on and so forth. So that's where this chart is showing the increase. So the average annual increase is here as a percentage, and then here's a total percent of our population of these students. Hope that answered your question, Brenda. Good question.
Okay, it looks like she's got
Follow up.
another question. What would the difference in dollars between actual enrollment versus projected enrollment?
Right. So that's a great question. That's the next item. I can go to, so let me go to that. So the cost per student grade span. So you're reading my mind, Brenda. So let me first talk about the table that you will find that information, and then again, the presentation that MCPS had in front of the county council. So on page 25, table 6. So here we talked about student enrollment in, actual student population, and that it's decreasing. It went down 880 students year over year. From 2024 to 2025. And then on table 6, you will see the cost per student by grade span. So the cost per student on this table, I've always pushed for. Last FY cycle, I pushed back on it because it's a different formula that is used here than MCPS used when they go in front of the county council. And so that inconsistency creates confusion. And I don't understand the benefit of showing it this way within the budget, but let's go over that. So to orient you here within the budget, we have for FY23, FY24, and FY25. This is the budget we're in. So the cost per student for kindergarten students is currently shown as $20,000 per child. Historically, it was $17,800, then it went up to $19,000, and then now we're seeing it's at $20,000. Secondary, middle school, and high school, you could see that here. And then in total for MCPS students, in 2023, it was 17,000, then it was 18,000, then it was 19,400. They've shown how they've excluded certain populations of students down here, which again, I don't understand why that is necessary or a better presentation. And then they show the total budget again. This is how much they were asking for, $3.3 million. When they came in front of the county council, so let me just make sure you remember, K for this year, they said it was 19,434. But when they went in front of the county council, for the total expenditure per student, they said it's $20,500. So it's actually higher, the cost per student, when you don't exclude certain populations of students because they are taxpayer funded. Taxpayers fund MCPS students at around $20,561. And it's been increasing over the years, where you can see here. I think that's a decent investment. If you were to Google the national average, or maybe Google other high cost of living school systems, I think you would see that for the amount of money we're spending on our students, we should rightly request that we see higher than above average proficiency levels. And I think that's where, me personally, that's where I'm like, there's a disconnect. Right? There needs to be a direct correlation that if you spend more per pupil, you should see higher than average benefit and performance and outcomes for your students. And right now, MCPS is not seeing that. Things are pretty flat. And so that's where I'm looking at, again, how much we're spending per student. and ensuring that those funds are translating into outcomes, which is where I think, again, the superintendent said he wants academic return on investment. Exactly, right? So it's one thing if I'm paying for a lot of money, I would like to at least hang my hat on saying, yeah, but we got the best school system in the nation. Yeah, but my child got into that college with full scholarships. So we need to have some type of response to, we're making this huge investment. How is this, panning out for us in terms of return on investment? So that's the cost per student. And then we have budget chapter 11. So one of the things I have been tracking over the year is the amount of legal fees and costs that MCPS has spent when it comes to taxpayer funds. And so sorry if my table is small, but recently MCPS did share that.
You can probably zoom in. Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Okay.
So for FY 2024, for non-special education, MCPS spent $2.5 million in legal fees for FY 24, the fiscal year just ended, as compared to the prior fiscal year 2023, which was $1 million. So we spent over 123% more on legal fees in FY 2024. As we know, we had like the Beetleman scandal, we had with the superintendent and the costs for that separation. We had, I believe, the Damascus hazing that happened with the student on the football team. We've had a few, and then the federal with, I think it was the opt-out. So there's been a lot of cases notable that generated this higher than average legal costs. But one of my concerns that I have with MCPS is, again, when it comes to estimating their budget for legal fees, they have not updated how much that amount is. So each year, MCPS projects between $700,000 and $850,000 in legal fees in their budget. But then when you look at the actual trend in legal fees over that same period of time, it was at minimum 1.3 million to 2.3 million. So why is MCPS budget team not revising their projected to either be same as last year, modified for any one-time, court cases, suits that are occurring, or maybe do a future look of asking their current attorneys, like how much more money it's going to cost for us to close these cases? Like, I just think MCPS needs to revisit their methodology on how they estimate their legal costs, because they're always underestimating how much it should be. And it just seems that either they're not expecting taxpayers to go back and look to see how much it really was, because it seems relatively low, but it's panning out much higher. We need better numbers put into our budget, because you'll have to find those funds from somewhere when it actually comes out. So I think that's important to note, that historically they have underestimated their legal costs, and they need to remediate their methodology in having a more accurate number to avoid material variances when it comes to their legal costs. And then we get to, and sorry, we're gonna, if you have any questions, let me know.
Hey, so we've actually got a few comments and questions. Can we take a little?
Yeah.
Just real quick. So Brenda followed up with her comment based on what you said, that it was about a $17 million difference doing the 880 times 20K. Max had a question about boundary studies. Are we going to talk about that a little later, or?
So the boundary study, that is one item that I believe will make it into the budget this year. So on December 5th, I believe was the last board meeting, the Board of Education approved a spend of up to $1.3 million for the budget study, the boundary study, which we have the video online from the superintendent, just kind of, again, publicizing that and indicating the vendor of choice will be Flow Analytics or Bloom Planning, I believe, is a both, is a subcontractor. And I believe that's the maximum spend. One of the things that MCPS has received the finding from OLO, the state OLO audit that occurs every 6 years, is that they would, the Board of Education would approve a certain amount of spend in the procurement, let's say the 1.3 million, but enough diligence is not done to ensure that the payout doesn't exceed the approved levels. And so that's one of the things we should look at. And then one of the other considerations with this vendor is just ensuring that as a small business, right, the county has prioritized that we work with minorities, we work with disabled, we work with women, small businesses, what I think is a great initiative to help, build up our small businesses. However, one of the concerns I have as a taxpayer is ensuring that these terms and conditions in the agreements will ensure that there's recourse for taxpayers, that should these businesses not be able to deliver on their promises and their part of the bargain, that there is some recourse for us to either issue fines, penalties, or get our money back because they're not able to perform. But if these small businesses are shell, right, they create a new company, they solicit, they do they do the RFP, they get the job, they don't do the job, they're not capital intensive, they don't have maybe enough general business liability insurance, what have you, then they could just file bankruptcy and walk away with our money. Right. And so we don't want things like that happening. And so I just want to ensure MCPS is intentional in ensuring that at the end of the day, yes, we work with small businesses, but we want to ensure that the job that it's supposed to do for taxpayers, that it is the most quality work for the amount of money that we're investing with this. But yeah, the boundary study is going to be happening a lot more.
Did you see the comment specifically? And I don't want to spend too much time because I think we'll have to dig into this more, especially in future episodes. But because we don't have that much time left, and we actually are getting some comments and stuff, so I want to get. And I know you got more too. But specifically, they said MCPS spending $19 million on Crown High School based upon a projected mid-county seat deficit of 1,900 seats, but the actual deficit is 495.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I don't feel like enough conversation is happening around. If we are seeing that enrollment is down in MCPS and is projected to be down, these schools, when they come online, are we truly going to have that future population of students that would need these schools? Like, is it that we need more of these relocatable classrooms to temporarily provide relief, or is it that we truly need these new schools? And so that's one of the things that I wish there was more conversations around, is do we truly need all of these new schools that we're building? Because enrollment is down, enrollment is not growing, and the projections are always missing the mark. Like, what are we really doing here?
And I know I did quite a few pieces on the enrollment, and what it seemed like is, once we hit that pandemic, everything got thrown off. We were greatly increasing every year, and then we've been kind of stuck around 160,000 since then,
Right.
at most. And that was where we were at 165K in 2019.
Right.
So we actually went down a little bit, and then there's, issues with birth rates, and like there's different ways to calculate the projections, right? A certain year may have less students because less students were born, less
Right.
people came in, and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of and then there's differences, like, we get in more students at like the high school level, I think it is, that come in, maybe they're at private school, or maybe they come here for a different reason. So there's a lot of different parts that go into that, and moving, and just got to keep up with that. So real quick, I just want to shout out. So Barb Martin on YouTube said, like and share, please spread the word. So, we're going to hopefully do a few more of these. We'll bring in some more guests also, maybe from MCPS, maybe from local government, maybe just other community activists, and, hoping to continue doing this. And I will eventually get this on all the podcast platforms as well, so you can share it with your friends that are into podcasts, or share the video for people that miss this, because the information is still valid even if you're not watching it live. So appreciate that and all the support. We had one more question about the legal stuff from Ricky Ribeiro. Said on Facebook, said, do we know how much MCPS paid to settle the Magruder shooting case?
I believe it was 10 million. That
10 million, was it?
Was a settlement for the students, or the one student or the students that, the hazing and all that happened through the courts. It was 10 million for that. And then I don't believe the principal was reprimanded as well. I think that was one of the things that came up by one of our council members earlier this year, when they had an audit here with MCPS, was that principal was allowed to remain in spite of that situation.
Okay.
Yeah, but I believe that was 10 million. And I think we talked about that at our budget.
Okay. I was just trying to do a little Google search to see if I could find some documentation on that as well. But we'll have to, I guess, look at that later. So that's all the comments and questions now. You want to continue? I think we got about 5 minutes left, and then I got a hard stop. So yes. I don't know what you want to go into next.
Yep, no, that's great. And I'll see if I can quickly find the questions I can give you. Yep. So I'm pulling up the presentation we did for the budget palooza. So definitely check that out. We did a really good job talking about it. But as I mentioned, so this is some of the, so I guess here, this was the Beetleman. This one was with the security officer that was charged. So, okay, so I didn't include um, the one with Damascus. But yeah, definitely Google it. It's well known. It's out there, and I can always provide follow-up. So one of the other items I wanted to touch on is when it comes to security in our schools. So in FY 2025, MCPS did not allocate any of the security team leads or security assistant positions to elementary school. And as we've seen tragically over the last few years, with the school shooting, I think that was one of the worst school shooting in American history, occurred in 2022 in Uvalde, Texas. That was an elementary school. And then most recently, locally, we had a would-be MCPS school shooter manifesto that acknowledged the best target population for success and mass casualties would be local elementary school. And so I am recommending that MCPS in their Appendix C for budget staffing guidelines, that they include for elementary schools some resources of some type of partial FTE or FTE for security in an elementary school. We could start with the building security, whether just like your home, you have the sensors, you have the security system, the live monitoring, what have you, but something needs to be done at elementary schools, I think, as a first step in improving the security in our schools for elementary school kids. And then for class sizes, so as we know, last year between the proposed and the approved budget, the class sizes for our students increased. And so as you can see here on my screen, within the pre-K for the staffing, the proposed classroom was 26, and then ultimately it was 27 in the approved budget. And so I'm definitely recommending that we reduce the class sizes, even if it's by one. We just do not want to go higher than what the approved was last year, because bigger classrooms are, going to take away from the direct time that each student has with the teacher, and it may create untenable workloads for our teachers in the classroom. And so I am looking to see what the guidelines are for our teachers and the classroom sizes to right size that in this year's proposed budget. And then lastly, I'll quickly talk about special education. Because again, I have a student in special ed, and that is definitely something that MCPS has underperformed, in my view, when it comes to staffing our special education student classrooms. And so the staffing plan for MCPS for special education, they recently, because special education always has, understaffing, teachers, for whatever reason, they are not as viewed as the favorable positions. They prefer to remain in gen ed, even if they're dual certified. And so MCPS this year, they contracted to have J1 visa teachers from the Philippines work in these classrooms on a rotation for 3 years, so that they can learn the American culture. However, I think that the business decision has created more boundaries in terms of these teachers will need to learn the American culture. They would need to learn about equity in America, the history, anti-racism practice, Black culture, because most of the students that are most impacted are Black boy special education students. And that is evidenced by MSDE that has cited that MCPS has over-disciplined Black boy special education students by at least 5 times greater their peers in all categories of discipline: out of school time, in school time, 10 days, 5 days, and that has dated back since 2019. And so that's one of the things I want to see MCPS prioritize this year, and to hear more conversations around with the Special Populations Committee, that we remediate these findings that date back to 2022, I believe, is when I started following this with the then director, Philip Lynch. So there's so much here. We'll get into more of it as the budget comes out tomorrow, and I'll do a deep dive to just talk about, here's what I recommended, here's what the superintendent's recommending, and then we can engage some more. But I really appreciate everyone joining this evening. I'm free to answer any questions, comments, put them in the chat, reach out to me, presidentmctl@gmail.com. Reach out to Moderately MoCo. I'm sure they'll forward it to me. But I really appreciate you guys indulging me for the 45-50 minutes. But this is really important stuff. It's your money, and it's your children, and it's your community, it's your investment, and we deserve to be more engaged. We deserve to have answers and to understand what's going on. And I'm happy to help champion that.
Okay, so we had one more comment, one more question. I don't know if we'll get a chance to actually answer them, but I want to at least read them aloud because the whole point of this is to highlight the community and the questions and stuff. So we got our first Instagram comment, which is WDE1217 said, "How much is being spent on interpreters?" I don't know if you have that information.
I don't have that handy, but I can look for that in the budget when we digest it.
Okay. And then the other comment, Ricky had a follow-up question when you were talking about the security assistants, I think, in the schools. He said, "This is an issue I've advocated on. We need one dedicated security assistant at every elementary school." And, current events just today, there was an elementary school that went to lockdown because there was I think a shooting or a gun at a nearby location, not at the school.
Right.
There was a middle school with 3 students were pepper sprayed.
Right.
So that was just today. The news probably hasn't really spread much yet.
And just to add one thing to that, the rippling impact of that is we know that MCPD is currently short-staffed, and there's going to be a potential exodus next month with retirement enhanced programs coming into fruition. And so there is a real need for security in our schools, and MCPD is already struggling, and God forbid they're dealing with something major in the community and they have to somehow figure out how to get resources to our children's school. We really need to address this in a sustainable way.
Okay, and then we have one more comment from Linda. "As a MoCo resident and an MCPS employee, I found this very informative. Thank you, Linda, for watching." And that's really what the goal is to be there for people to learn and know more, and to be able to kind of get that feedback back to everyone else. So so with that, let's close this out. I just want to say thank you again. I think this is an excellent episode 1 of the MoCo Mike Live podcast, the only podcast discussing Montgomery County, Maryland, and beyond issues where you are part of the show. Come join us next time. Make sure you follow both of us on social media, and we'll see you next time. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, it's just going to take 1 sec to